Welcome in, everybody, to the Fantasy Football Podcast. This is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia, and projections can sometimes lead us to glory, but they can also lead us to fantasy irrelevance. Every single year, the projections come out, and we have to take a hard look at them and see which players we really like when it comes to projections and which ones scare us. So I sat down with Pat Fitzmaurice and Scott Bogman to talk about some of the projections on some players that have us a little concerned in 2024. So here are what the guys said about some of these numbers that just don't jive for us. Pat, when we talk about projections, obviously, there's different places to get them. FantasyPros projections are obviously outstanding. But when you look at projections, how much do you factor those into your psyche when you're doing your rankings?
So the one thing about projections that I don't always appreciate, Joe, like median projections sort of assume that everyone's going to stay healthy for most of the season. And I know some people bake in a couple of missed games for injury-prone players, maybe even one missed game for players who've been relatively, who've had clean health track records. But we know that the injury rates in the NFL are sky high and are going to wreak havoc with median projections. So the one thing median projections can't give you are ceiling and floor outlooks. And I know some people will endeavor to do like a high-end projection and a low-end projection, like 3 sets. And I appreciate that, but we know that injuries really can wreak havoc with these median projections. So they're good. Like, we have to look at them and think that, okay, if everyone stays healthy and with the distributions of touches that we're expecting, this is about what we can expect. Like, they're absolutely useful, but to kind of fall in love with them. I mean, 2 guys might have the same projection. George Pickens and Amari Cooper have very similar season-long projections, but they have wildly different outlooks. I mean, Amari Cooper is kind of a metronome of production, and George Pickens, he could give you a 1,400-yard, 10-touchdown season. Sorry, Boggs. Or, he could go belly up, quite honestly.
All right, Mr. Steel City, let's talk to you about projections. Do you use them just as a baseline of saying, all right, this is a good idea of what my expectations can be for the player? Or are you somebody, Boggs, that is very heavily invested in projections in terms of how you're going to make your selections in drafts?
Projections to me are like campaign promises, right? Like politicians. I listen to what they have to say, but I have no respect for them. So that is pretty much how I view projections. And I think Fitz is right. What you want to know is not the top level. Sometimes these numbers are top level, sometimes they're median, like Fitz said. I think as long as you know the range of what to expect and you know what the system is going to be like. A couple of these guys are staying in the same system. Sometimes you add players, sometimes you get a whole new system, and a player can be used completely differently. So I look at them, I use them, I hear what they have to say, and then I go, I don't know. So sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't, and we'll find that out here as we talk about some of these players.
He's Scott Bogman, and he approves this message. Let's get to one of the players to start us off with that maybe the projections are very good, but scare us a little bit. Isiah Pacheco, the running back of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Boggs, this is a running back that seems to have a pretty clear path on a great offense. The continuity of Kansas City is very good. They're elite level offense, great quarterback, great head coach. We've seen Pacheco's style be very aggressive, and sometimes that has taken its toll on him physically. So when you're looking at the projections for him, you're seeing somewhere around 1,000 yards, basically somewhere in that 9 touchdown range, basically cutting and pasting his receiving totals from last year. So what about these potentially have you a little bit scared when it comes to Pacheco?
I don't know that this number actually does scare me. I think this is about right. I'll say this for what Pat said about injuries, especially with running backs. I think I would rather see a type of pace projection, like a per game projection, because we know most of these running backs probably aren't going to play every single game. But, you want to see the numbers for the season. That's what you have. Well, that's what we have to go off of. Right. So I think this is probably about right. And honestly, this number, if Pacheco were to be healthy, it could be light. I mean, they didn't add anyone. He missed 3 games last year. The Chiefs were 25th in rush attempts last season. I don't know if that's going to hold up again this season. I think they could run the ball a little bit more. So I actually think this number in particular is okay. So I'm okay with this number. Maybe the receiving side, I would say maybe comes down, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe Rashee Rice doesn't, maybe gets suspended for a long time. And, now we're working with, not less talent, because I love Xavier Worthy, but less experience. So maybe Pacheco gets some checkdowns earlier in the season. So I think this number's okay. Is it perfect? No, projection's perfect, but I actually don't mind this one too much.
Well, Pat, the old watermark of the 1,000-yard season, I think meant a lot more when it was 16 games, and now it's a 17-game season. So should we maybe not be as impressed with this projection of Pacheco under 1,000 yards over 17 games?
Yeah, maybe not. And it's funny, when Boggs gave his little prelude mentioning injuries, I thought he was going to mention how on Pacheco, with Pacheco on every carry, it seems like he's trying to break through a door. I mean, like
he's trying to
I love that about
the ground. Yeah,
I do. I just love that about him. It's a Jersey thing, baby. Just running through doors.
It's great, but it does concern me, I think, if I've got him on one of my teams and I'm hoping for long-term health. With me, Joe, it's really less about the rushing yardage projection. And I kind of agree with Boggs that these projections that have him maybe a little under 1,000 yards might be conservative. But I think the projections for his pass catching are maybe overly aggressive. I mean, he went from 13 receptions as a rookie to 44 catches last year. And we know that the Chiefs wide receiver core was just terrible last year. And they have since added Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. And like, even if they miss Rashee Rice, if he is suspended and loses some time, like, it's still an upgraded wide receiver core. And are they going to need to throw to Isiah Pacheco that much? Like, I think I'm betting the under on 40 catches for him.
All right, let's move on to another running back here, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. Now, last year, Cook really came on strong, right? When they changed coordinators, Joe Brady took over weeks 11 through 18, averaging 19 and a half touches, 104 total yards. That's a pretty significant increase there for him. But he did score just 2 rushing touchdowns last year. He did have 4 receiving touchdowns. Josh Allen took a lot of the rushing touchdown equity last year in that offense. So, Pat, this year, looking at the projections for James Cook, you're looking somewhere around 239 attempts, 1063 is the rushing total, and 5 touchdowns. So what do you think of these projections when it comes to Cook?
Pretty aggressive in terms of the volume. Like, we're running it back from last year, and I don't know if we're going to get that with Ray Davis around. Like, and we do know that they did, after they made the offensive coordinator change, Cook got more work. And like, maybe we can run it back and think that he's still going to get around 230 carries. I kind of think we're going to see less than that, and that Ray Davis is going to be a bigger factor than these projections suggest. I do agree with the slight bounce that we're projecting in touchdowns. I mean, he had 2 rushing touchdowns on 237 carries last year. But it's funny, no one is being that aggressive in the projections, either in ours or some of the other people who do them, Mike Clay, Jeff Ratcliffe. They all have him around 4 rushing touchdowns. So it's an increase, but I think it's still saying, yes, we're still going to get a lot of Josh Allen near the goal line.
All right, Boggs, are you concerned also that this backfield, the way it might be set up here with Ray Davis, does not yield as much as maybe the projections are telling us that it could for Cook?
Yeah, I think so. If we look back and if we give Ray Davis, the rookie running back, every single RB carry that he didn't get, James Cook didn't get last year, that put him at about 150. That's saying no other running backs get any carries, right? So I don't know. I think it is going to be split a little bit more. I think Davis is a good enough back. And I don't know what's going to happen with the touchdowns. But even if Ray Davis is the goal line back and they are giving Josh Allen had 15 touchdowns last year. I don't think they're going to want to do that again. But I think James Cook is one of the hardest guys to project, because are they going to pass less without Diggs? You just added a rookie. Maybe Dalton Kincaid gets more. Do they pass more? Does Josh Allen have to run more because they don't have Stephon Diggs here? So I think Cook is a really tough guy to project, but I'll say that the touchdowns increase even if he isn't getting a lot of goal line carries. He'll break a couple and score more than 2. So I think if we get 5 to 6 touchdowns, we make up the difference in touches. So I'm okay with the fantasy points number here, but I don't think I'm really okay with everything else. I think it's going to look way different. But we could see increased receptions from him because, we don't have as many receivers here, as many experienced receivers. So I think Cook is a tough guy to project. I like the number that we have. I don't know if I like how we got to the number. So I'll say that.
Let's take a quick break in the action to tell you about DraftKings. We are this close to crowning the NBA champion, and with the action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. It's super easy to get started with DraftKings. If you're a first-timer, try betting on something like a team to win, or just go to DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. It's just that simple. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use that promo code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. And now back to the action. All right, when we're looking at this next running back, projections are really intrigued about this guy. They seem to be very bullish here. Last year, this running back had just 800 yards rushing on 233 attempts. This year, 268, 1075 with 9 touchdowns projected for Josh Jacobs of the now Green Bay Packers. Now, understanding last year was probably going to come back down to earth after a 400 touch season the year before. Is there reason to be excited potentially, Bogman, about a bounce back for Josh Jacobs, or should we be concerned, new player in a new offense in a new city, also with Marshawn Lloyd, a guy that they drafted that the coach continues to talk about a lot this offseason in some of these OTAs?
Yeah, I think there is definitely reason to be excited about Josh Jacobs, right? They gave him a bunch of money. He's going to be their lead back. And I think he's going to score, I think we have him for 9.5 touchdowns. I think he's going to hit double digits again. I think he's that type of a player. The 267 carries, I think, even though we've seen Josh Jacobs be a 300 plus carry guy before, I don't think we're seeing that. Last year, that would have been fourth. I think that would have tied Travis Etienne in terms of carries. With Marshawn Lloyd there, they brought back AJ Dillon, and they ran the 22nd most. They had the 22nd most rush attempts in the league last year, so below average. I don't think we're getting to this number here. The touchdowns could go up, but this one I actually am a little leery about. So I have him as a high-end RB2, not an RB1 anymore.
It was a weird season last year for the Packers run game. I think Pat might know and understand this better than anybody. He had Aaron Jones be good for the first week of the season, then he was hurt most of the year, and then came back at the end, looked good in the playoffs. So it's not like we haven't seen running backs be successful here with LaFleur, but the question is, another year of development for Jordan Love. Do you think that this number sounds right to you, Pat, for this many rushes, this many rushing touchdowns for Josh Jacobs, coming off a season that was relatively disappointing considering how much volume he had the year prior with the Raiders?
I think the projections for Jacobs' rushing attempts are really overly aggressive, Joe. Matt LaFleur has simply not been a one running back type of guy. And we've seen A.J. Dillon typically average 9, 10, 11 carries a game, even when Aaron Jones is healthy. And I think we can all agree that Aaron Jones has been a much better running back than A.J. Dillon has been. But yet, LaFleur has endeavored to keep Dillon involved. When LaFleur was the offensive coordinator for the Titans in 2018, he gave Dion Lewis 155 carries, and Derrick Henry was in that backfield and didn't miss a single game that season. Dion Lewis only had 60 fewer carries than Derrick Henry. So if LaFleur is giving Derrick Henry 215 carries in 16 games, should we really be projecting Josh Jacobs for like 267 carries? To me, that's way too aggressive. Also, I don't think any Packer fan, certainly myself included, expected the team to take a running back in the third round. Like, that was kind of a mind blower. I might have expected it in the 6th or 7th, but not in the 3rd. They had already signed Jacobs and they had already re-signed Dillon at that point. So, like, to me, that's a clear signal that this is going to be a multi-way backfield. So, like, for the projections to suggest that Jacobs is going to be among the carry leaders in the NFL, I'm not really buying it.
Yeah, 4-year deal for him, too. So we'll see how that works out. Let's switch gears, talk about a wide receiver. Let's talk about T. Higgins, because T. Higgins last year, incomplete season, right? Only played 12 games, only had 42 receptions. Joe Burrow was hurt. It was a disaster for the Bengals. We want to move on to Cincinnati in 2024. But before that, back-to-back 109, 110 target seasons, 74 receptions, both of those years in 22 and 21. this guy was really predictable, somewhere around 6.5 touchdowns, somewhere around, 1,020 yards. Now this year we're looking at projections, Pat, of 71 receptions, 1,060 yards, 9 touchdowns, a little bit more bullish on the touchdown. So what has you possibly concerned about T. Higgins here in this contract year? I know they brought in Jermaine Burton from the draft, and I know everyone's very high on him, but it seems like Higgins is a pretty easy, safe player. Does that carry over for you in these projections enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much in line with what he did in 2021 and 2022. If you project T. Higgins on a per game basis, that's about what the projections say he's going to do in 2024. Last year, kind of a write-off because of his soft tissue issues. Maybe that shouldn't be a write-off, though. Maybe the hamstring thing is kind of a lingering concern. I don't know. I wish I could articulate my concerns about this T. Higgins projection better, Joe. It's kind of, I've got this inexplicable sense of dread about this. I just feel like there are too many things that could go wrong. Either, more injury issues for Joe Burrow, like a greater target share for Jamar Chase. Maybe Jermaine Burton is really this good because a lot of people love the talent. It was more what kind of a locker room presence he is that had people concerned about Jermaine Burton. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw Jermaine Burton far surpass Tyler Boyd's productivity in Cincinnati. So I just feel like there are more ways for this projection to be derailed than for like T. Higgins to go over the projections.
All right. Well, that's fair enough. Boggs, when you're looking at T. Higgins, who, does seem to have a really safe floor, and you're looking at, some of these last years, some of these numbers that he's put up were in moments too where Jamar Chase did miss time in certain seasons. Joe Burrow has missed time in some multiple seasons. So does that make maybe these quote unquote safe projections maybe not as safe as we think? Because if Joe Burrow is healthy and Jamar Chase is healthy for a whole season, is there enough really to let T. Higgins reach 9 touchdowns potentially and well over 1,000 yards?
I'll say this, for the number, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with the numbers that we're given here. Burrow's back. Run game took a hit. They drafted Burton, but Burton is a big play type of guy. He had 39 catches last year in college, right? And 20 yards per reception is ridiculous. He's a home run hitter. So I don't think just in terms of pace, he's going to take a lot away from Higgins. The offensive line, hopefully, is a little bit better, but I understand the trepidation that Fitz has here because this is a guy playing on a franchise tag. He's not showing up to OTAs. Is that going to bleed in to camp time, right? He had injuries last season. There's concerns with Joe Burrow staying on the field. So there are red flags surrounded this projection and just T. Higgins himself this season. So I understand if you don't want to roster him. But for me, I think Higgins is a number 1 wide receiver on a lot of teams. And if he's playing 17 games with a healthy Burrow, I think these numbers are probably in line. But this might be look, everything is normal status quo number. And I just don't know if we're ever going to get that from the Bengals. So it's a little eyebrow raising, but I think if everything goes as planned, these numbers are right in line.
All right. This next one I have massive concerns about. David Njoku, who had a breakout season we've been all waiting for. Highs in receptions, 81, receiving yards, 882, touchdowns. He had 6 of them. The trouble is he did most of this damage with Joe Flacco. That's the problem. And last time I checked, Deshaun Watson is theoretically the quarterback of the Browns. That's the big issue here, Boggs. So when we're looking at David Njoku this year, it is really difficult to feel good about cutting and pasting. I think there's going to be a lot of people that go into drafts and they're going to see David Njoku's ranking. They're going to see projections for him similar to what you're seeing right now, 821 yards, 70 receptions, 6 touchdowns, and say, okay, I feel really good about David Njoku. But I think it's really tough to feel good about Njoku considering that this breakout did not come with Deshaun Watson. So if Watson is indeed the QB, it's really tough to sell me on the fact that he is going to be the guy that helps make David Njoku year over year the same guy. Do you feel the same way about Njoku's projections this year? Are you as concerned as I am?
I am, and I do understand people saying, look, we finally got the season from David Njoku that we've been waiting for. Here it is. Finally, it's here, and now we can count on him. Can we, though? Like you said, and Fitzy's been talking about this all offseason, about how Flacco is the guy that threw the ball to Njoku. Nobody else threw the ball to him. But they also added Jerry Jeudy. I thought Elijah Moore was going to retire because of that nasty concussion he had, but I guess he's going to keep playing. So he's still in there. Cedric Tillman gets another year. And they kept Nick Chubb. Jerome Ford was pretty good last season. This is a run-first team that also brought in Nyheim Hines to catch the ball out of the backfield and Deontay Foreman. So this run game is still very strong. That is what the Browns want to do. They want to run the ball first. We haven't seen anything from Deshaun since he got traded to Cleveland. So this number makes me squeamish, especially with so many good tight ends available. I'm not paying for these numbers.
Pat, I think that's the problem too, is that, there's the elite level tight ends, but then there's a really interesting middle with Kincaid, with George Kittle, with Kyle Pitts, who I'm in love with this year, Evan Ingram coming off 140 targets last year. And then the drop off is Njoku, where I almost feel like there's a false sense of security there when it comes to Njoku. And it's not that I don't believe in the player or the talent. It's I don't believe in the relationship between the player and the quarterback yet, because I haven't seen it with those two guys. And if Winston ends up taking over at some point in time for Watson, whether it be injury related or performance related, that's another conversation we can have. Maybe he could be the guy that continues to unlock David Njoku. But Pat, this is a tough sell for me to buy into a situation of a breakout, but that's not the quarterback he's playing with this year.
Oh, I'm with you, Joe. And Njoku is often ranked ahead of Jake Ferguson. I think Jake Ferguson is much, much safer than David Njoku. Joe, you remember the old game show Card Sharks?
Where I loved Card Sharks.
They would flip
higher
over a
Bob,
card.
lower Bob. Yeah.
And the contestant would have to say higher or lower depending on the card. All right, so David Njoku, with Deshaun Watson in games he started and finished, 35.2 receiving yards a game. I think we're all screaming higher on that for 2024. In games that Joe Flacco started, 78 receiving yards a game. I think we're all screaming lower on that. So Njoku is probably going to finish somewhere in that vast chasm between 35.2 and 78 yards a game. But boy, that's a big range. And as Boggs mentioned, like Kevin Stefanski's always been run heavy, except last year when Flacco came in and they didn't have Nick Chubb. And they're like, we're just going to let Flacco wing it around like we're a Canadian Football League team. That's not going to happen this year. So, yeah, I mean, I'm with all of these projections coming in around 800 yards and 6 touchdowns for Njoku, I'm pretty pessimistic he gets there.
So that's what the guys had to say about those players, but we want to hear from you. What players are you high on or low on in projections in 2024? Drop your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. And of course, ring that bell till it goes ding for notifications. That'll do it for me, Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.